You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm your host, Doug Thorpe, and today we're going to talk about helping you think about your sales effort as a company, but we're going to take a different twist on that. My guest is a gentleman named Christopher Cumby. Chris, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Doug. I look forward to this, and to your audience. Thanks for listening in.
Yeah, you bet. And the twist we're going to talk about a little bit is that Christopher's done some great work in thinking about how to gamify your sales effort. So I'm going to let you describe the background story on how you kind of landed on this idea. So take it away.
Sure. I appreciate that. I won't go way back when, but I certainly will start off with, a lot of times when I was younger, being an introvert, I would, obviously pay attention, just a little bit more detail, looking at people. So I'd always try to figure out a way that I could make some money. I was driven, to buy things. I come from a humble family, so it always was, I had other siblings, so it was sparse, I should guess, and so I would just find ways to have my own, little, bag of nuts, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
So driven by that, I always was interested in obviously having a career in areas where, I would be able to influence that in some way, sales being one of them. But I really started out in accounting, and good thing, because, understanding accounting and money is a good thing. But really what drove me was, how do you make it? And let's make the money. I want to be effective on that line, and so sales for me started off really young. I've always been, on that front line, whether it's business development. I was with a big company called Pepsi Cola. Probably everybody can recognize that name.
Sure.
But I was on a fast track system, learned very quickly about marketing and branding, learned very quickly about relationships, handling, very large responsibility as a young kid, in my mind, looking back when I was in my sort of early kind of mid 20s, large budget. It was Coke Wars, Pepsi Wars. And so I learned a lot about people, and, I was able to, do really well with, remember when they said you couldn't sell water in a bottle?
Yeah.
Unless it was Evian and it was $12 or $15.
Right.
I think it's still up there, but it's not $15 anymore. And there's lots of water being sold. Well, I was one of those guys on the front line selling that back in the day. And, it really taught me a lot about so much. But one of the things that was really important was getting results and, driven by, incentives. People were incentivized and they would do something. So, gamification's been around for a long time in the sense of rewards and, getting things. But what I, discovered was that, gamification, when, you think about the progression, even playing a video game for that matter, you have to do things to get rewards. And there's sort of a track to that. Excuse me, pardon me. So when I kind of correlated moving into a new position in my life, I had sales people and responsibilities now, and I had to drive that front line. So what I recognized was, if we can incentivize the activity that we wanted them to do, and that added up at the end of the day, if everybody did the activity, the result would, be sort of X. Lo and behold, we did. Really gamification was born for me through rewards and then leveling, people up and showing them to. And I went through a really interesting subject on leveling up, and the value that you bring lowers the amount of let's say what do they call it, limits, if you want. And we'll talk about that at some point. So anyway, and I apologize for my cough here. I don't know why I'm having one, but gamification for me came very much by ignorance. And But what I realized and what I studied and what I implemented in my own life was that, hey, maybe I can, use these same philosophies and things that I'm learning in my own life, and my own career. And, through that, let's say challenge, if you want, to try and figure it out, I discovered a lot of, frameworks and principles. And, a lot of them were things that, now I can reverse engineer, and I just get to work on, the principles, and, a result will prevail. Depending on, a few circumstances and things, it may change a little bit, but there will be a good result if I do these things consistently with focus and, with effort and, with intention. So I started learning how to, reward that. So, and I think when we were talking earlier, one of the most amazing things was that we could bring everybody up on the sales team based on again, the ability to bring the bottom up. The top was always going to do well. And we had like a huge amount of success, and people were coming on the trip. So gamification for me was that sort of ignorant born thing that now I believe, I've kind of tapped into a little secret sauce, and now I help others.
Yeah. Well, give us some examples of how this gamification is applied. Let's say that, I'm a small business owner and I've got maybe 3 sales guys working for me, and, maybe I've got them carved out regionally or, geographically or something like that. But what's a kind of an entry level game that I can implement for these guys?
First of all, to do that effectively, you have to know what motivates each person. So, having an understanding of getting people's, and, I think in the basis of salespeople, getting their money right, getting that money right is such an important aspect that I believe that if you start there, then it's just a matter of understanding what motivates them. And then, from there, what is that game going to consist? And it could be different for different people. And that's the beauty is I have come up with ways where some people wanted certain things. So it was a point system really. And at that point would be able to, purchase if you want, if you keep it real simple. So I would find out what collectively as a team motivates them. And some things were physical things, and some things were cash, and some other things were just pats on the back, surprising enough. And, it all went into a point system. And we really, if you wanted, your team to do anything, pay for the activity you want them to do. It's really simple for me. Pay for the activity you want them to do, guide them, and show them ways that they can collect things along the way. Just like if you're playing Mario Brothers and you can collect coins along the way, they're all worth something at the end of the journey.
I know a number of the small business owners that I've worked with in the past. A lot of times what they'll implement, they'll recruit a salesperson, and it's 100% commission arrangement. There is no base. So
Been there.
you would expect that just the nature of that alone would be incentive, but what they've often lamented is they're still getting no results out of that person. So and maybe we're ultimately talking about someone who's an outlier on the curve of possibilities, but any thoughts on how to overcome that?
Absolutely. That's the ideal dream, right? Have someone work for you based on, pure motivation, and the incentive and the nut is big enough for them to get up every morning and go do the work that you want them to do. Wouldn't that be a dream? Obviously, some people have that environment, in commissions, and what makes it tick. I've been in there. I've been in a situation where they said there is no check. You've got to go write your own.
Yeah.
So first of all, knowing that has to be a mindset thing completely. That's driven by pure, possibility and belief in oneself. And there are fundamentals to and common things that I believe successful people carry. The number one trait is they believe in themselves. So, and maybe at this point, for someone saying, well, I make $150,000. And if I said, well, is that enough? And they say no, then can you make more at your bit, where you work? No. So what are you going to do about that? So there has to be and you can have a side hustle. I believe in those. Why not? if you're in those situations. But if you are a person who, would rather take the route, and I was already on a salary. I already did 400 million in sales. I didn't get paid anymore. So I took that leap of faith, knowing that I had skill, that I can go do this, and skill can be taught. So everything that I'm talking about, by the way, can be acquired. It's easy, really. Now, I'm sorry, it's not always easy for people.
Yeah.
That's probably the better way to put it.
Right.
But the point I'm trying to make is the access to information is there. So the mindset is number one for that. So if you have commissioned salespeople, you better be feeding them really good information. Number one.
Yeah.
Train them on their mind, because delayed gratification is a real thing. And we talked about it. It's just consistently focused energy, like just activity. I'm always a big believer, activity being connected to your direction. You being the MVP of your game, what do you need to do for activity that's connected to your direction? Being is really taking care of yourself. Number one, your mind. Number two, your body, probably equally to that.
Right.
And I look at that as being sort of the basis. So those are the types of people you need to find. And listen, not everybody's going to fit that, or that cloth, that you can't take someone who doesn't fit. And sometimes you can mold them into that, but that takes training and belief in themselves. And it really needs to start there. That's a trait that, you have to have coachable people. They want more. They can push themselves more, right? So there's a trait to those people.
I think in the realm of small business, if I had to summarize it, and I invite anybody who's listening who disagrees with me to jump on it, and you may disagree with what I'm getting ready to say, but I think there's a natural sort of chasm between the idea of hiring a sales guy for your company. There's just I don't know if it's historic or perception or whatever. But in my view, and in most of the companies I've been associated with, the sales guys, even though they need to be the rainmakers to make the company, top side revenue, there's this sort of natural disconnect. They're not trusted and everything. And I know myself in my own business back in the day, and others that I've worked with, if you hire a sales guy and put him on a base, you better make the base no richer than a bare minimum.
Enough to pay the rent.
And barely enough to pay the rent. Because if you go over that, you're going to find them, they're showing up, they're making some calls, but you can tell their heart's not really in it. And
absolutely. Disengagement is the biggest issue that, American companies face. I say American companies because primarily they're the culprits of disengagement, because of our culture. And, there are other areas, don't get me wrong, that have equally biggest challenge. First world, probably nations for sure, have the similar numbers, but 67% of Americans are disengaged at work. That's costing $6 billion.
Yeah.
So, and my solution to that, Doug, was play a game. You can't play a game disengaged.
Right.
And why do we like to play games? Why do you like to play games, Doug?
Oh, there's all kinds of ideas. I think of things like, can I beat my personal best? Can I
to win? Right?
Can I Can I climb the leaderboard and the ladder that might
challenging
be established?
What
does it mean to others, and what does it mean to me? I mean, all those things come to mind.
Fun.
Yeah.
Right. Fun.
Right.
So if you can create an environment and culture that's fun to get up to play a game, that if we all play the activity and we play by the rules, then all we need to do is just show up. And that's really what most things, people show up, but they don't show up with this.
Yeah.
They don't show up with a positive attitude. I'm always a big believer, people want to set goals, they set goals, and then they don't have a good attitude towards them.
Yeah. Right.
It's like, it's not going to work. That's not how it works. So, going back, and you asked a question around commissions and, what can you do about it? Well, first of all, get the right person who understands delayed gratification, understands also that you're not going to limit them. And you're also going to support them with the materials that's going to, I always say, don't send your sales reps into a gunfight with a butter knife.
Yeah.
Make sure they're well equipped.
Right.
Make sure they have tons of support. If you're going to take on a commission route, then you better have a very, very good system of mental, personal, development material. Number
Right.
one. If you
Right.
do, that will give you half the battle. Now, if you add training in there and some good support and a few other things like marketing and things like that, then you'll do really well. But I'll tell you the real crux. I can go out in now in my career with a plain piece of paper, no marketing, and I've learned the skill of listening and going through, conversation and finding information that I can come back and be the first one to tell people if it's a good fit or not. I've learned that I want to work with certain people. And, a lot of times with salespeople, they'll just work with anybody, especially at the beginning. It's like, I'll take it. I'll do that, and you just start making, sort of arrangements that just no longer fit really that rhythm, right? So anyway, there are a lot of things we can talk about and go down that rabbit hole on mindset and rhythm and, just being at the right place at the right time. But that, requires, a few little tweaks. And that's what I help companies with is really getting in there. I always say I'm like a sales mechanic, you bring your car into a mechanic to have a look at. And, when you get there, you say, hey, something's up with it. I don't know what.
Yeah.
And you expect them to give you an answer.
Right.
They won't. The first thing they'll say is, hey, let's put it on the lift. I'll look under the hood, look under the car. I'll look, look around, and then I can tell you what's up. Same thing with me.
I think one of the conundrums for most small businesses is their sales process is not real sophisticated.
Undefined.
So they may immediately pull the trigger on hiring a salesperson, and then immediately you realize the process is pretty lame and pretty busted. So that becomes a disincentive for the salesperson. It's like, well, you're going to make the sale break down because you don't get it over the goal line. Once I land it, I can't get it in the boat because you guys have all these other things going on, and
Absolutely.
So you start that classic conflict between sales and operations, and if you don't have a system and a process in place to sort of seamlessly bring that together, that's a unmotivating factor for the sales guy.
Wow, you can get clogged very easily. If one of the biggest fears for a producer, a sales producer, is back office support. See, I'm a big believer that all companies really only have two departments: sales support. That's it.
Yeah.
So we all have to make sure that process, as you just mentioned, is well defined. But here's the problem, Doug, that most people haven't sat down and gone through their customer journey. They just start a business. They just start a thing, and they just go kind of haphazardly into the woods and try to figure their way through it. And, without really understanding that, all that time they're in the woods, the path is just right there. That's kind of how entrepreneurs, tackle things. But you made a very good point, is that, if you sit down and think through your sales process, and even if you're not a salesperson, it's very much easy to just follow like point A to point B to point C to, kind of walk through who in my back sales office support helps with a person who comes through the door through conversation with a salesperson. And, what does that look like and translate? The biggest thing and the reasons why most people, fail, let's say, to close business is the customer's confused.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never close a confused mind.
Right.
So it's really important that you really nail your sales process, because you can, kind of start at the beginning, end a conversation, and they'll probably remember both the beginning or the end or just one. But if you can walk them at that point, kind of reverse engineer it a bit if you want. And I love using that, is because if I know, as, kind of on the other side and being a customer, if I know, what the end result is clearly and I can see it, the matter of someone walking me through how I get it is really just kind of takes all the fear and anxieties and doubts and, am I really getting that? Or am I, is it something else? Is it smoke and mirrors? Am I now judging this person in front of me? Are they telling me the right information? And you
Right.
could cut through a lot of that noise very easily with, just helping a person understand how they access it, from point A to point C and, everything in between. And it kind of takes all that guessing out. And that's really what people are hung up on. It's not price, it's not all those things, because price is made up, let's face it. It's really their lack of believing that there's value, and value is delivered right from, I love put it this way. A lot of people talk about giving value to customers. I give a crap load of value to my prospects. That's more important. Customers will naturally get it, but they'll naturally get it only because I give a lot of it to my prospects. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of sales training that I've been exposed to, there's that premise of what's in it for me. If you as the sales guy can explain that to your prospect, they're the ones asking the question, what's in it for me?
Joe Polish just wrote a book called What's in It for Them.
Yeah.
Very good book, and a ton of sense, and just pick it up. I think it's great. There's a good one for you, Joe.
Yeah. I had a thought a moment. Oh, you mentioned in what you were saying a moment ago, that creating that clarity in the customer journey, and you said it similarly, and I've used it a lot with my people that I'm coaching in their leadership effort. A confused mind says no.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't create clarity in your message and get that good understanding across the table and help somebody really see the way clear, they're going to be inclined to say no 100% of the time.
Yep. And that's what the rat, sort of wheel, or the mouse wheel looks like, or the gerbil wheel, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Hamster wheel.
Hamster wheel, yeah.
It's the same thing. It's just trying to, and that's what's happening in America right now with salespeople on the front lines. It's just showing up to do the same thing, and instead of showing up to do activity that's aligned, for them at the end of the day, it means something. It means I'm going to get some new points.
The question was, how can I really differentiate, just not look like the next guy? And if you're in a business where there are a number of competitors available in the marketplace, how do you work with a prospect and truly get that message across that this is the right one to pick?
Mm-hmm. Listen, a lot of people, meet with a lot of different companies in a competitive market to figure out the value price, and it sometimes comes down to price. So, how do you stand out in that environment? Well, I've always been a big believer that don't get hung up on one client for one. There's lots more where it comes from. And, one of the things that I've always believed in is obviously relationships, and, building the sales team's ability to have like an emotional quotient. You know what I mean? Like that's more important to me than IQ. EQ is way more important. So, one of the things, when you're in a competitive market is making sure that the people representing the company, align with, really the transfer of information, the enthusiasm that you would have as a business owner about your company and why you're, in business in the first place, providing a good, valuable product, a good, valuable service. We talked about price is made up. Budgets can be blown up as well. If someone has, complete belief in themselves, and that's why I'm a true believer that your salespeople need to believe in themselves. You need to believe in yourself. When you have that as a baseline, and, really that's developed. Personal development, by the way, is always overlooked in companies. It's common. They don't have any books on the shelf. They don't have any resources for people to help, and we could talk about mental health today, and maybe you have it on your benefits program and you can go to see a, psychologist and things like that. But I'm not talking about, let's say real problems that, people have to get through, mentally. I'm talking about just pure information that can help them be a better person, better at what they do, help them understand, maybe, a different perspective on things, and, really learn their craft. I'm a firm believer that you got to sharpen the blade every single day. The people that do, they read, they grab a little thing, a nuance here or there, something that really helps them with, having a conversation, listening to other people in your organization. That's a great one, that are really good with dealing with people, learning how they deal with people. Why are they so good at bringing in deals? Because I'm selling the same thing. Why is, Joe over there doing way better, and, Sally over there, who's amazing at what she does? I'm selling the same thing and I'm not getting what what they're doing. And that is a real thing. It happens every day in business. So you can imagine what happens with the person who maybe doesn't get all the limelight or, necessarily the kudos.
Yeah.
You buried them in self-doubt.
I think you're right. And that whole question of personal development is really not that hard a challenge to think about. And I'm, as you were saying that, I was reminded of a situation. I had a client a while back. He was a national sales director of a good size, I'll call him Fortune 1000 company. And he was sharing with me a concern that he had some new guys on his team and he knew they needed some development, and he kind of felt like he didn't know where to start. He had personally taken him under wing and kind of mentored and tried to get him, on the first level, but still felt a little frustrated. And I asked him, I said, well, for starters, do you ever have team meetings where all the sales crew comes together and shares best practices? Tells stories. I just landed this deal. Here's what I had to do. Here's the steps I went through. Here's the cadence of the calls. Here's the follow-up we did. Here's the answers I provided, blah, blah, blah. And he said, God, we've never done that. And I said, oh, goodness. Well, why don't you start there and see how that goes? And he, about a month later, he came back and he said, oh, my God, we had our first. He said, the weird thing is, he said, we've had sales team meetings all forever, but
Sure.
we're focused more on the gaps with handing deals over to that sales support, as you call them. And more the tactical and not really about the sales process itself. He said, but we flipped the script and we started talking about that. And now all of a sudden, everybody is performing at a better level.
Yeah, everybody's clear. The human condition is, when we don't have clarity, it, causes confusion, and, self-doubt can, easily creep in. And, you can imagine if everybody's in that situation. Now, there are going to be a few. Joe and Sally, they're going to continue to do their thing. They figured out a rhythm. They know what they do. But to your point, they haven't shown anybody else because no one asked them.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely role playing is a missed fortune inside of companies, because they truly expect that you should know this information by reading it, and that's not just how people learn. Or sitting in front of a computer or watching videos. That's not necessarily the best way. What I found is a combination of things for sure, and it really comes down to understanding the person that you're having on the team in the first place. What motivates them? Just find that magic formula, and you'd be surprised by equaling the playing field a little bit and doing something in a way that people can participate, and you're not excluding them immediately, because they already defeated themselves when they see that they have to do so much and to get a prize, instead of showing them that, hey, this is how you participate, and by the way, these small moves that you're really good at and consistent with will get you a prize. Yeah. By the way, we're even going to show you even a few other things that can get you the bigger prizes, because it's all about consistency, and obviously, and just repetition's the mother of skill. and believing in yourself. And, quite frankly, confidence is built by keeping the small promises to yourself. So that's when personal development comes in, is because you want a strong-minded person who understands that, no one's coming to save them, but collectively as a team, we can all pull together and we can all move in this direction. We can all win. You may not win the grand prize, but you're going to win, because we're all winning. And that's what I believe. I believe that, rising tides,
Floats all boats.
Floats all boats, right? But inclusion and, having people in there, listen, and there are competitive organizations that have their own sort of cultures. I understand that, but you can really define, and you can put it this way. I could probably find 10% in everybody's company by just working on personal development.
Yeah.
I'll make a statement.
No, I believe it.
Yeah.
I believe it because, everybody's got an ability to kick into a second level of what they do. And, in one of my books, I talk about that, and is the idea of everybody shows up with two gears. They have the mode they'll go into to accomplish the baseline required performance on the job. Keep the job if you do X. But then everybody also has a second gear that's popularly called discretionary effort. And it's when you hear somebody talking about, you give that extra, 10% or 20%, that's that discretionary effort. And if you can motivate, inspire, and incentivize people to perform in that second gear all the time, that's when you get that extra bounce and that extra gain, because it's there. You just gotta, if you're a leader, you just gotta tap into it.
Absolutely. And 1% effort every single day compounds. So, it doesn't take much to move the needle. It just makes people, you just need to have people stepping it outside of that comfort zone, and getting a little uncomfortable sometimes to grow. And, really, I always say the comfort zone's so dangerous. Just nothing grows there.
No.
Yeah.
I did an interview yesterday with a lady that is into neurosciences, the science of the brain. And we got into a discussion about the fact that studies have shown us when we're operating in what we feel like is our comfort zone, what it really means is your brain is going backwards. Your brain is not being challenged to grow and accumulate new information, and that's what it's designed for. And
I want to share a little quote on that a little bit, and it was from Coach G2. Little throw out for Coach G2. He always listens to the shows I'm on, so that's his name, Gary White. But he said something interesting to me, and it was like the level where let me just get it right. The level where we decide to stay is the limit we decide to obey. So, we all have another gear, to your point. We all have another way. It just has to be defined in terms of what it's in it for us as well. What's in it for me? If you find that, magic formula between employer and employee, you keep them real close, and you work with those people. And I'm a firm believer that, even small businesses, if they don't have coaches, are missing out on a huge fortune. Because it doesn't mean having a coach that you have to spend an enormous amount of money. Coaches can come in different fashions, but even having one is really important because it shows that you're investing in your employees, and that you believe in them. And that the person coming in is more just like any administration that has a professional team out there has coaches. They have general managers, they have presidents, they have CEOs of companies. It's the same sort of thing. Any professional organization has a coach, and, a true believer, you can cut a coach into monthly, quarterly, annually, weekly, daily. It just depends what your budget is, but you all can afford a good coach. There are many really great coaches that fit, your business. And, that's just a matter of just, interviewing a few that you like, running with one, and it'll change your business completely, because that's the kind of thing that, a lot of people, if you think about it, they bring in lots of different information to the company. They do different trainings with the company, but often overlooked is just having someone who can come in, have some coaching principles, have some frameworks that meet the company's, sort of culture and requirements and things they're going after. And it's amazing what you can extract out of people, if you come in and have a good talk. Like, just even on a Zoom, you can have 100 employees all on a Zoom, just having an ability to listen to things that can help them discern themselves, help find true ways that they can tap into their own development, wants and needs and desires. And, just encouraging them to do that as well is really important. Having a library where they can tap into. I like doing this to get started, because you asked me, how do you get things going with commissioned salespeople coming in? Find a really good resource. I love Ed Milet, just because he interviews a lot of really cool people that have real life challenges, and he's not afraid to get to the dirt, and really put it out there and find solutions that, people that are faced with the similar ones can really get insight. So I always say, hey, find a really good podcast. If you're a sales leader, or a leader of any company for that matter, a CEO listening to your show right now, find something, a resource where if you want to amp up your team, it could be as simple as not even getting a coach. It could be that you're going to coach and you're going to lead, but find something that you can help everybody rally behind. So here's an idea for you. Find your best motivational sort of podcast or something out there, book, a YouTube video, a course, whatever it may be, but find something you can get all your team to at least participate with you, and then talk about it.
Yeah.
And let everybody give a little bit of what they learned, round table, and you'd be surprised at how many of your team start to embrace an ideology that we can all do better. It's just amazing what happens when you actually communicate and you have forums that you allow, people to grow and personally grow at that. And, that's some ideas that I've implemented, working with a lot of leadership, a lot of people. And it doesn't have to be arduous to make change. It doesn't have to be huge investments to make change. It just makes the commitment and the want and desire to make change. And that's it. You'll find a way, or you'll find an excuse.
And part of the way that happens is really at the core of what all major coaching programs and trainings are about. So those of us that call ourselves coaches and we go to the training, for instance, the International Coaching Federation, at the core of their methodology is the notion of just asking questions, not really telling, not advising, but sitting down with your client or your client's team and asking questions they've not yet asked themselves.
I love questions. It's a beautiful thing. And, sometimes the question, and I think Elon might have said this, Elon Musk, the question is sometimes harder to come up with than the answer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. And to your point earlier, I think managers and executives in business of all levels, they get in a comfort zone of how things are running, and they think that's success. But inevitably, there are some other questions that can be asked. And what you really find out is your team has some serious roadblocks. They've got some serious struggles, and you haven't asked the right questions.
Absolutely. Can I help maybe with 5? What I don't want to call them general questions, because they're certainly not general. They can be very specific. But I think the questions themselves can basically be used in any kind of situation, if that makes sense, whether it's personal or whether it's what I believe as an organization, or more, people, more than two, or more than one, 2 or more. So if you don't mind, I can share those questions.
Yeah,
and I
ahead.
usually do this anyway, but somewhere along the line in shows it comes out. I think what's really important for anybody to ask is, what do I want?
Yeah.
Often we get up in the morning and we start reliving yesterday's problems.
Yeah.
Instead of maybe starting off like, what do I want today?
Right.
So what do I want is a really great question. And you could use that as I said, as an individual question for yourself or as a collective group. What do we want?
Well, and
yeah.
let me add to that. I think that's a great question, because often when I get asked to come in with a business owner and start working, what they're talking about is the sense of they're stuck, they're overwhelmed with the details, they got a long list of reasons the company's not quite performing where they want it to. And I start with them, well, let's stop for a minute and ask yourself the question, why'd you even start this company? What was your dream when you created this? What was the end game you were shooting for? And have you lost sight of that?
Most people lose sight of why they started it in the first place.
That's
sure.
right. For sure.
Second question, if I may, is that why do I want it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's why. Well, you could do a lot of different things in life. Why do you want to do that?
Yeah.
The third question, where we start to get into the human condition and really what you have to work with as a human being is your emotion. We're unfortunately unfortunate to have emotions. There's a fine line.
Correct.
And they all have a frequency.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, when I was on the radio show, I used to play with people because I used to coach people on radio every Saturday morning. Just as a collective coach, sitting down, just as I said to you, as a leader in any community or company, you should have a soapbox. You should articulate who you are and what you want, and help people rally, the ones that will believe in you and they believe in themselves. So I believe in that. But I always said, if you tune in at 103.4, you won't hear me because it was 103.5.
Oh,
so
yeah.
We all have a frequency, we all have a tone. So the emotion is something that you can check in real quick. It says, well, how do I know I'm high frequency, or how do I know I'm low frequency? Well, how do you feel? That's right. The quickest indicator on that moment and that time.
Yeah.
How to deal with things. So emotions are really important. So right. The big question is, the third one is what feeling will I have when I get what I want?
Right. Right.
This is where the rabbit hole goes, and for everybody. And I love these questions, by the way, because I ask them frequently, because I've just been, I always like to kind of sharpen up and get better, and I think it's important for people to have that want in their lives. I really do. Who doesn't? Why wouldn't you want to get better?
I've heard a version of that. Another coach was telling me about this. He said he likes to use the methodology. He'll say to somebody, "Hey, Chris, let's fast forward. Let's say I bump into you at an airport 5 years from now, and I say to you, wow, you look great. You look, healthy, fit, strong, excited, motivated. You're at the airport. Where are you going? What's going on?" What would you tell me why love that is that way?
I love that. That's
what's happened in your life in the last 5 years that gets you there.
It's great projection. Yeah. And often when I'm coaching people, I'll have them write me a letter 1 year from now. Like, they can't get a hold of me. There's no internet. There's no, I'm with the monks in Tibet, and they got to send me a letter. So tell me, what happened, as if it already happened, with excitement, enthusiasm, detail, all of that. So it's really important to tap into that. But feelings are a really good thing. So what will I feel like when I have it?
Right.
Why do you want that feeling? Why do I want that feeling?
Right.
Why?
Right.
And here's the one that, might trip up a lot of people, but, once you get it and you keep doing this, you'll get really good at it. Why is that feeling missing now? Yeah. Now you can see why that's a rabbit hole.
Right.
Good questions lead to good answers. I think those questions can help a lot of people, whether it's I or we. I believe that, again, The more we know about ourselves, the better, chance we're going to have to succeed in the things we endeavor on. Because once you know yourself, you can trust yourself. Once you trust yourself, you can do anything. And that is the real truth. And I got, shivers saying that today, is because I truly believe that we all have a rhythm. And I had this great chat, with Coach G2 as well. That rhythm is something, that is available at all times. We choose. And like I said, and I'll say that again, and I'll recap my questions just for everybody as well, because there was a little bit of dialogue in between. But I'll just repeat, the level where we decide to stay is the limit that I decide to obey. And, that's the thing that can stick with you, is that if you're at a place in life right now, it's because you're obeying to it. There's always more. There's always a way to, hit true potential. And nothing should be based on, the failures or the things that happened in life. It only should be reflected on the learnings that you can bring forward that you can help you get where you need to go. And answer questions. What do I want? Why do I want it? What feeling will I have when I get it? Why do I want that feeling? Why is that feeling missing now? I found those questions to be guiding lights. I hope that it, can help people, today listening in, Doug, that are trying to, get to a new place, trying to push themselves forward, getting insights, listening to podcasts like your great podcast, listening to interviews that you're having with people that can really bring, value. But, Jeff Hoffman, who's been a mentor to me for a long time, he says, ideas are welcomed always. Execution is worshipped.
Yeah.
And, that sticks with me. Because nothing will happen if you're not doing something about it. You have to take the action. Sometimes, listen, I have fears doing things that I don't know. I still have fears of things I do know. But courage is really something that people can tap into, because it's having the fear and doing it anyway.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Like, we all have fear. Yeah. But some of us just do it anyway. And
I think that's the hallmark of a successful entrepreneur. You're going to have your fears and doubts about what you're doing, but you figure out the way to overcome that. And
yeah, the overcome, if I may share,
yeah,
just make sure your desire is larger than the fear.
yeah, oh yeah.
I don't have an answer for that.
Right? Pray more than you you have that self-doubt. That's all.
Right.
That's all.
Right.
You'll have them. You'll have self-doubts. You'll have problems. You'll have issues. You'll have challenge. Once someone said, adversity is abundant.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's always going to be there. Try to be and become someone who can solve problems, and you can communicate effectively. And if I think you have those two skills, you'll do anything that you want. And importantly, the problem-solving side is just say that you're a problem solver. Like, I am a problem solver, Doug. You're a problem solver. I know you are.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
Just, become a good problem solver, and you'd be surprised.
Well, that's a great word, Christopher. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up. We've packed a lot in this show, and I hope for everybody's benefit they've really enjoyed listening in. I know I have. So thank you so much. Hey, tell everybody real quick the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm active on all social media, but, really, if you Google me, ChristopherCumby.com, you'll find all the things that I've done. And, my website's probably going to show up first. It's ChristopherCumby.com. I've got some cool things going on this year, and, social media, probably Instagram will be, place I share a lot, Facebook, because I do a lot of groups and coaching. Of course, there's a lot of people in there as well. But yeah, probably between those, Twitter, all the social medias, LinkedIn, of course, you want to find me. LinkedIn's, Christopher Cumby as well. So,
okay. Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you for sitting in, and really appreciate all your wisdom and experience. So
I always appreciate you, Doug, and thank you for having me. I mean, you have an amazing show. I have this awesome, feeling and energy with you. You're easy to have a great conversation with. So that's why your show is successful. And everybody listening in, I really appreciate you, coming in and spending a little time with us. And, hopefully we provided some things that can help you. and level up this year. That's, my words, level up for 2023. Level up, let's go. You have it, you can get it. No matter what's around you, just don't compare yourself, just do your thing. Be you. There's a rhythm for you, and it's going to show up if you get rid of some noise and pressures.
Love it. Love it. Well, again, thanks. And I do want to remind everybody that if you're listening to this show on your favorite streaming service, we do have a video version over on YouTube, channel by the same name. Hop over there, check the library, look at the past episodes, and subscribe, leave us a comment, let us know how you're doing and what you're doing. I do appreciate everybody listening in. We're here to try to help you understand principles of leadership that can be explained with some good common sense answers. So for now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, and hope you have a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.